Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, fucked up and old, but here on this particular occasion to join you. Sorry about my last stream, but both of my guests flaked out last minute. I asked them to indicate to me when they would be willing to reschedule. Very happy to make it as convenient as can be for both of them. And yeah, I have not yet heard back from them. However, I have a guest today made of sterner stuff with a proper commitment to his appearances. I'm very, very grateful to have him. Robert Daigen, also known as Marhobane, is joining us today to talk about Cape Independence. Before I let him introduce himself, because he's doing many things, more than before the last damn time I talked to him. He's got all sorts of irons in the fire. Please do follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as A Safer Space. You can do that on Odyssey, though I don't know what'll be happening with Odyssey. You can do that here on YouTube. Please follow me on Telegram, on Twitter. And I'm over on Gab as well. You can find links for Robert's stuff. I forgot to put the Substack link in, but you will see below links for him on Twitter. X. And you will also see his YouTube link from there. I'm sure you can get a link to his Substack. I'll try to remember to stick a Substack link in there afterwards. Please buy my books. This is Vinculum. This is a sci-fi story set in the year 2076 in Istanbul, where our hero, a kind of book thief, is pursued by remorseless corporate hitmen and an esoteric sect of assassins. There's also my collection of poems, Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. You can find links for both of those below. And my apologies for not having been around for a bit. I had actually actual real live things to do. But here I am with Robert Daigen. I'd like to ask him to introduce himself. He's been a guest here before, so many of you will know him. He's a friend of Conscious Caracols as well. Both gentlemen I like very much. They are experts, frankly, when it comes to what's going on in South Africa, and that's a term that's bandied about too loosely. But in this case, both gentlemen know quite a bit about it. I'm very happy to have Robert on today. Robert, for those who are unfamiliar with you and your work, what sort of introduction would you give them?
Well, I'll just say what I do for a living and go from there. So I'm a political analyst, and what I've been doing for a living for the past 2 and a bit years is taking contract work to fill out sort of odd-shaped research projects for conservative elements of the civil society sector in South Africa. So studies into things like, how do you come up with a private sector solution to land invasions? That's my current one that I'm trying to wrap up. I get asked to do odd-shaped things. I mean, I did one last year on, relevant to this topic. The Cape Independence Movement managed to get the regional party to agree to have a workshop on how to devolve powers, because they were trying to say, well, let's compromise. You don't want to do independence. Let's try autonomy. And so I was contracted by one of the members of that board to do this fact report. That was 99 pages in Microsoft Word that I had to crunch out in a month or two, on all the different loopholes in the Constitution that allows you to devolve power. That was a frustrating process because no one in the committee read it. And I think the worst part about it is that the regional party, which is now sort of reluctantly getting into trying to claw back powers and finding out that they can't do much. I could have told you that it's now easier to get independence than it is to get even the constitutionally available powers back, because it will take years and years and years of grinding. But here we are.
So basically, consulting of a variety of kinds.
very awful sort of world of consultants, bunch of grifters we are.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you from what I've seen, you do quite well at attacking odd white spaces, gaps in people's thinkings. One of the reasons why I'm very, very happy to have you on today, because you're not only informed enough, but by inclination able to think about this subject from a number of different angles. As I've seen from reviewing some of your recent, I think they're fairly recent, Substack posts that you gave me links for. I'd encourage everyone, this is why I'm an idiot for not having posted the Substack link. As soon as you start talking, I'll track that down and try to plug that in. But I recommend everybody go over, because you've got a series of articles on this. The first two, which I read in full, cover some of the geopolitical implications, which I hope we'll have a chance to get into today. But to start off with, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure there'll be a series of substantial corrections to my grasp of this situation, because it's partial, certainly. But what we have here is a situation where South Africa is broken up into various regions, some of that going back to the historical period. Let me see if I can share this screen. Yes, sorry, boomer moment here. I need a window, actually. Yes, let's go over to this one, and then, oh no, I need a Chrome tab. Where is it? I need the, how's that, 188? I think that's a good one. Let's try, no, that's the racial one. Let's try the map of South African British possessions. Okay. Can everybody see that? Is that working?
That is an interesting, I always liked that map, but that was there are some sort of divisions in that map that are not visible before. I mean, so the Cape Colony at the time had it had some sort of native reserve program. So, like the eastern portion of the Cape Colony, there's where most of the Xhosa people live, and the western portion is, you know, mostly white people and then colored people. Now, there are a lot of Xhosa people who moved westward after, you know, wars with the Zulu in the 19th century, and so a whole bunch of them joined. They sort of became their own ethnic designation as the Mfengu, although that doesn't have much political salience today. You can occasionally talk to people and find out, you know, who they are. I mean, our second black president, Thabo Mbeki, is Mfengu. But the those fellas, they fought for the crown and everything. So there's a sizable portion down here originally, although the influx now from the Eastern Cape is insane.
Well, okay. Well, just very quickly to give everybody the proper context, I just wanted to pull this map up to show that you had these British possessions here in the Cape, and then there is. Let me just show one other one as background to set the stage for what you're certainly going to go into. Where is this other one? Share screen. And it is.
Yeah, it's one of those awful problems of South Africa. Is you tug on any little string to try and explain something, and you tug the whole fucking thing along with you. You end up having to explain things.
Okay, this is
that's a great one.
A historical racial concentration. So we can see that we've got a preponderance of coloreds. I think historically Cape Colony was the first settled part, and then the Dutch went. They were driven eastward and northward over time, right?
Yeah. So you can see, if you compare those two maps, that the that sort of orange area that's mostly, you know, white and colored. Sorry, not orange, but sort of burnt yellow.
Puke mustard, yes.
Yeah. So that region is what today is sort of generally felt to be the Cape. That the eastern border of that zone is interesting. I had a Twitter fight with a sort of pro-black leaning colored fella. Like, he's probably one of my most intelligent interlocutors, but we agree on nothing. Anyway, but we had a dispute based on a passage from Jan van Riebeeck's diary from fucking 1650 whatever, about where Xhosa people were found when white people first showed up. And I had to go back into the record and try and find evidence of first contact. And it turns out that 30 years after the first settlement, they sent in a little expeditionary force to make contact, because they're word of mouth rumors of another tribe. So they head east, and they gave the measurements like this. They said they rode 500 miles eastward along the coast from the peninsula, and then found themselves within a 5 days horse ride from where these people live. Now, I sat on Google Maps and I plotted out carefully 500 miles. And I go and look up how far can a horse travel in 5 days? And I went for the lowest estimate, because they'll be carrying a lot of stuff. And it put me just other side of the Sundays River, which ironically marks where that boundary is over there. Now, the map you're looking at now is from 1911. It doesn't say so on the graphic, but that is when it's from.
Well, it does say based on 1970 census. So
does it say that? Are you sure? I just know this map, this particular image, as being a 1911 thing. But then again, it probably does look the same, because in 1913 there was they had the what's it called? The my brain is Swiss cheese. It's not the Group Areas Act. It's the Land Act. It's just called the Land Act generally, and that sort of demarcated where people of what races can own what land. So it kind of cast that period's geographical demographics in stone. So you won't see much change between the map I'm thinking of and this one.
Indeed, as is reinforced in the comments by one Robert King. But the main part I wanted to get at is that
he's a good guy. I'll mention him later.
Excellent. Well, we see that there is this difference ostensibly in racial concentrations here. We have the historical initial settlement of the Cape Colony. So we have sort of a historical precedence here. I would assume that there is a considerable amount of Anglophone versus Afrikaner-speaking concentration that developed here. So we've got the historical sequence of settlement in the area that sets apart the Cape area. We've got, or in its various subdivisions, we have some racial differences, and there's ethnic and political ones. I feel sure when I was just trying to get a handle on this from the beginning, I saw that the Cape had more quote unquote liberal traditions from early on, probably going back to Britain and British influence. So sorry, Robert, this was basically just to get this this fundamental picture out here, that you have a region that does have some perforated lines, that does stand apart from these other communities or political subdivisions. And so what's happening now is apparently there is a movement for independence. And so I was wondering if you could introduce all of that by maybe telling us, you know, a snapshot of this, because doubtless I've missed all kinds of important or salient aspects. How did this whole thing for a Cape independence movement start? And is there, presumably there are aspects of it that are built into the Constitution, or you guys wouldn't even be trying to do it. So what is this? If we could just stick for a moment to what this is as an introduction for everyone who's you know, tuning in and doesn't have any background.
Yeah, well, it actually got started very slowly. I mean, there's something called the Cape Independence Party, which is still around, although it's not being managed very well. That's been around since 2007. But it was seen as a fringe movement. No one really paid much attention to it for a number of years. It's run by a guy called Jack Miller, who went to a very posh school in Cape Town. You can actually tell which schools people went to by their accent if you know how to listen for it. And he very much sounds like a bishop's boy. He's a nice guy, but he's struggled to really generate a lot of popular momentum. And then sometime around 2019, you started to get other people interested in it, and there was a group called Cape Exit that had this idea to come up with pledges through online engagement. They were very good, very active, and very good on Facebook, and they pulled together signatures from hundreds of thousands of people. Their little growth pattern topped out at like 850,000 signatures, calling for a referendum. And that really sort of put it on the map, because there's a sizable portion of the electorate who want it. I mean, we're only 7 million people here in this part of the world. So we had, at the same time, there's a British expat called Phil Craig, who's married to an Afrikaans lady. He's been here for like 20 years, and he's an interesting character in his own right, because he dropped out of school at 16 and started and worked his way up to management of large retail chains, and then got bored of that, came down here, started companies down here in the Cape, and I mean, he raises his children Afrikaans. So I met his daughters once, and they said, Papa, laat ons nie toe om Engels in die huis te praat. Daddy doesn't allow us to speak English at home. So he's gone full native. Even though when he speaks Afrikaans, his accent is so strong, it's unbelievable. But so he's really invested. But his accent and his background sort of lead some people to a lot of conspiracy theories about CIA and MI6 and cock like that. But he's been the most effective partner of the movement, because what he's done is he basically used a combination of lobbying and writing articles and all these things to get it inserted into the national dialogue. And he put together something called the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and managed to draw in a number of civil society organizations into getting the Liberal Party, it's the Democratic Alliance, or the DA. He used all the civil society groups to get the DA to come to the table and discuss how they're going to devolve power to the province, to take it away from the hands of the Marxist black nationalists who run the country. And that went okay for a while, but the Liberal Party is now they're concerned with trying to contain the Cape Independence Movement, because they have their eyes on national government, and the Western Cape is essential to them having any real representation at a national level. It's a difficult one for them. Because now they're having to choose between survival at a national level and survival in the Cape. So they kept lying and prevaricating and breaking promises and so on for a while. And Phil Craig said, okay, well, fuck this shit. I'm going to start a party. So he started something called the Referendum Party. And they're basically going to try and nudge the Liberal Party under 50% in the province, so they're forced into a coalition and forced to hold a referendum. And here's where it gets tricky, because the Constitution allows for provincial premiers to call a referendum, but it's dependent on legislation, which doesn't exist. So then you've got this whole thing of, you've got a constitutional court which has specific powers that are unusual around the world, which is that they can actually read in and legislate on behalf of the parliament. So they can basically take existing legislation and say, okay, we're reading in this new context, or this new paragraph, or this new whatever. And they've done it with a couple of things in the past. So the idea is that they can read in the right for premiers to call a referendum if challenged. And so all that really needs to be done is that the premier straps on a pair of balls and does it whether there's legislation for it or not, and sees what the Constitutional Court says. Is this okay? Is this not okay? unfortunately, the Liberal Party, like most Liberal parties, is very big on, oh, well, we don't have permission to do this and we don't have permission to do that. I mean, we're staring down the barrel of real existential threats, and they're going, well, see, I'm not quite sure if it says this in the Constitution or not. So there's that whole thing going on. And in the meantime, they're trying to sort of trying to make some containment moves. So there was a recent battle in the provincial legislature that's not quite over yet, over two pieces of legislation. Now, the Cape Independence Movement also includes a very old Afrikaans party called the Freedom Front. And the Freedom Front has been around since, I think, before the 94 elections. And they're comprised of fragments of old right-wing parties from who were opposed to the National Party's reforms, as well as some other people. So a lot of the longest sitting Minister of Parliament in our nation's history belongs to that party, and he's the head of the party for the province. Very erudite and personable guy called Corne Mulder. And they've pushed for Cape Independence as well as a party platform. So we've got like a right-wing sort of flank over here that'll is starting to take Afrikaans-speaking votes from the DA. And then we've got a liberal flank with the referendum party that's deliberately targeting English-speaking liberals who are big fans of the DA and saying, here's our deal. We'll back the DA's policies on everything. We just want a referendum, completely single-issue party. We'll guarantee that we will not let the ANC into power. Of course, it's impossible for the ANC to get in power in this province because even if you combine them with the EFF, they make 25% of the vote here. So there's no way they'll get into power unless the DA lets them and decides to form a coalition with them. But now that's an interesting thing, is that 4 of the most influential leaders in the Democratic Alliance, the Liberal governing party in the province, have actually publicly said that it would be the least worst option if in the next elections to join the ANC because, well, they want to keep the EFF out. Now, this is silly to me for a number of reasons, primary amongst them being that the DA simply does not have the balls to negotiate at that scale. I mean, this is a party that can mobilize huge numbers of people to completely destroy the infrastructure of any town they don't like. They run criminal networks across the country that operate internationally. There's all kinds of shenanigans. And while they're incompetent on many, many things, they do not bullshit when it comes to making sure that they keep their patronage networks functioning. I mean, targeted assassinations are a big deal in this country. There's hundreds every year. So the DA are not equipped to play on this playing field because, they're a bunch of house cats for the most part. And if they go into power with the ANC, they have no leverage to demand anything of them. So they'll basically become a little appendix. This is what happened to the old Afrikaner Nationalist Party, is that when they were declining, they eventually just decided, oh, okay, well, we'll just join the ANC. And all of the old apartheid ministers just went and flooded into the ANC, got cushy pensions. The last ruler of the Nationalist Party, Martinus van Schalkwyk, ended up as the Minister of Tourism and then later as the ambassador to Greece. And he now works for the United Nations in some environmental office. So they just completely got absorbed. And I mean, look, a lot of their mid-level guys went over to the Democratic Alliance. So the DA got a lot of capable civil servants. They have undoubtedly got the best quality, bureaucratic characters in there. And I mean, on the dissident right, people are used to dissing, our bureaucracy, managerial types, whatever. But if you're in a situation like South Africa, you see immediately how bloody necessary people like that actually are in keeping things running. you can have the functioning of your entire party hinge on a guy who really bloody knows spreadsheets inside and out. And so, your managerial types and people who can keep control of big, messy organizations, you need them. And it can often mean the difference between having running water or not. So the DA has almost all of the guys of that caliber under their wing. The problem is that their strategic direction is no good. It's no good. And it's unfortunate because their most talented rising leader is now the mayor of Cape Town. He's the same age as me, young guy. And he unfortunately is very much open to, everyone from the rest of South Africa must come down to Cape Town. You'll see how wonderfully we'll govern, and then you'll all vote DA. But it's not happening. I mean, all the sort of black people who come down from the rest of the country, they don't vote DA. They just either stop voting or could keep voting for the ANC. But most of them stop voting. In fact, a few weeks ago, the Independent Electoral Commission that goes around to register people for voting, they got chased out of Khayelitsha, which is a big township in Cape Town. They got chased out by people who just didn't want to see them. Sorry, it's not Khayelitsha. It's an informal settlement in Philippi, which is, it doesn't matter what Philippi is for you guys, but yeah. No, it's voter apathy is actually not apathy. It's hostility to elections. And there's a lot of it going around. So we have a voter turnout that's like maybe a third of the country that's eligible to vote comes out to vote.
Yeah, I've noticed that you've done quite a bit of research on voting patterns. I think at least part of it is reflected in that second group of linked articles that you shared with me, where you look at the percentages of the various constituencies, also their rate of turning out to vote, which is all quite interesting stuff. I want to ask very quickly. We had a couple people say, I want to hear the rest of the story about the people who traveled east on horseback. If I understood you correctly, the point you were trying to make was, in your argument with the person on Twitter, that if you actually try to calculate how far they got, it does correspond to the modern borders, and therefore there is some basis for them historically, right?
Yeah, no, I mean it started as like just a little dispute on Twitter, but it sort of solidified something to me, because like for me then the real boundaries of the Cape are the Sundays River, which runs through the middle of the Eastern Cape Province. And the thing is, if you look at an ethno-linguistic map, that's even today, that's where the boundary between Afrikaans as a majority language and Xhosa as a majority language runs. There's like a big vertical solid wall there. Now, the population balance is shifting because a lot of people are moving into the cities, but through the countryside, it's still very much, you can see where those lines are drawn. There's the Western Cape Province is the one that's most likely that is going to be trying to secede, but we're actually already starting to reach into the Northern Cape for support. And the first point of support is, now you'll notice on that first map that you showed, there's two little things called Griqua Land West and Griqua Land East. Now the Griqua are a group of mixed race people that sort of started their own nations, and they were led by a guy called Andreas Waterboer, a water farmer, which is a very bizarre name. And his descendants still, they're still knocking about. So it is in Griqua Land West. So they're still knocking about in the Northern Cape, and there's a guy who's, for some reason, has fantastic contacts with all of the traditional Cape leadership groups. This is the interesting thing about the coloured and Khoi peoples in the Cape, is that they actually, their contact with Western civilization gave them sort of understandings of of republics and independence and so on. So they started their own little groups, even in Namibia. You'll find things like the Rehoboth Republic and so on. So they started these tiny little micro republics all over the frontier. They weren't very long lived, but memory of them persists. And that's our point of contact for the Northern Cape. And so hopefully in the future, you'll get a referendum up there for making the Northern Cape independent. It's very sparsely populated, very dry, but has some good minerals. I mean, it's the lovely thing about the Northern Cape for me, from like a geopolitical perspective, is that if you have the Northern Cape as part of your country, the thing is, you've got enough raw minerals that you can actually do your own native industry from your own mineral resources, but you don't have such an enormous supply of anything that's too valuable that you invite international attention. So there's enough uranium for like personal nuclear power fueling. There's enough manganese and copper and iron to do some native industry. And there's a few little diamond mines that honestly I wish people would leave alone, because it's destroying some really vital natural habitat. But yeah, no, it's, there's that nice balance. So I think, if everything went stellar for us and we could get Western Cape, Northern Cape, and then the western part of the Eastern Cape, let's call it the Tsitsikamma region. If we could get all of that independent, we'd be a very well-placed country with plenty of resources, but not too many. And lots of land area, access to main sea routes and everything. I mean, this is one thing that struck me when I was looking at the latest BRICS conferences. How many places around the world is China actually they're playing a different match from a different game from the Americans.
Yeah, hence your use of the Go imagery rather than, for example, chess. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, because Millet getting in Argentina means that they don't get Cape Horn anymore, but they've got everything else. I mean, they've got the Cape because South Africa's on their side. They've got Egypt now coming in, so they've got the Suez Canal. And then they're doing that new thing with Thailand, where they're basically making, they're going to put a new shipping route. That's
an alternative pass-through rather than the Straits of Malacca that they've been thinking about for quite some time. Yeah, their canal system.
Right. So,
and remember that they were not so long ago trying to put an alternative to the Panama Canal up further up in Nicaragua, if I remember correctly.
Well, that's
and that got put on hold.
Yeah, that's ambitious. But I mean, look, Panama needs an upgrade, from what I hear. So, there was a while. I remember when what was that? Was it Evergreen or Evergrande or whatever the hell? Because now I'm confusing the property company with the shipping company. But there's that big blockage in the Suez Canal for like a week or two, and all of a sudden, like you get all of the shipping traffic coming past the Cape of Good Hope again for the first time in how many hundreds of years?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I sort of thought, well, if China's got the Cape and the Suez Canal, then you're royally fucked. I mean, you can't.
Yes, and don't forget the largest, and I think at this point maybe the only major Chinese overseas base that's right there by the Horn of Djibouti too, which has to do with access to the Red Sea there in the southern section. So obviously they're trying to play.
Djibouti's mental. Who puts all of the major powers? Who invites all the major powers to put military bases on your tiny little pimple?
All the ones who want to get involved with that interesting east-west route that could run through the Sahel and link all of that together and create a border with transportation infrastructure between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, we're seeing all the interesting things going on from Niger and all these other recent West African areas that have had coups, all the way across to the Sudan, where the fighting is raging.
The black nationalists down here have been cheering endlessly about all of the Sahel Belt coups. We're showing the middle finger to international, colonialism and shit. I'm like, bro, you guys are so naive. That's like
Chinese and Russian rather than, for example, French and British or
Italian. I find this consistently hilarious. Is that the ANC was literally run by the Russian Comintern right up until like 1989. And it's they just don't see the connection. They're like, oh no, they're here to liberate us. Really?
Well, now maybe this is a good point to take a look at the larger geopolitical picture, because, and it was interesting to me, I have my own suspicions about that I shared with you on Twitter sometime back. But and I know you have some of your own, because with the 2-part article that you shared with me, I really should just pull this up and mention the title for everybody who's on here. The names of the two that we're talking about here. Let me just pull it up. I had it over here on my phone.
Nato, because I thought, Cape to Cairo, that my sister tried to do that journey in a 4x4 and quit in Tanzania, but
right. Cape Town to Cairo, Rhodes' great dream that was shut down. Yes, and Rhodes will come up later in this discussion. Yeah, it's called Cape to Nato, and there's a part 1 and a part 2 I highly recommend. In that, you're thinking, well, Cape, and then it comes to NATO. And of course, recently we've heard about things, this term that got conjured up, Kanzuk, right? Which is basically this whole idea of these former Commonwealth countries coming together again in a sort of alliance. It could be economic as well as geopolitical. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. That has been floated quite a bit. But to me, what's very, very interesting about this is, you talked about something called Cape Exit, or however it is. I don't know if there's a shorter version of that.
They're a little organization. The thing is that they're essentially a mailing list at this point, because it doesn't mean that doesn't exert influence, but they don't understand power very well, and so their understanding of how they'll personally contribute to achieving independence is not realistic. The referendum,
but to me, what's
more realistic.
What's interesting to me, because obviously I don't have any of this granular understanding what's happened there, is that we've seen that name introduced. That is what is of interest to me. Cape Exit.
Yes.
And so when
there has been attention from the Brexit crowd, from those cowboys who are involved in Brexit, to our little game down here. Obviously, I can't share anything that's not public. Though
wasn't there a Nigel Farage
correct
news
Phil Craig
program
appeared on Nigel Farage's show on GB News, and that was in lieu of, he was actually going to be down in the Cape at the time and promised that he would make a personal appearance at the party launch, but he couldn't, and the plans changed like a couple of weeks before that, and he said, no, I'll put you on GB News, you got a much bigger audience, all that. So,
and tell me something very quickly, this thing going on with Nigel Farage where he's doing some sort of safari bullshit as a celebrity thing. Could somebody in the comments tell me where that's located? Where is that adventure that he's on where he eats?
It looks jungly to me, so it's not my neck of the woods.
Right, but where was it? Hopefully someone will tell us in the comments. I remember there was something about him eating some sort of animal's teats. I don't know if it was like armadillo teats or something. Oh, it was in Australia. Okay, sorry. I was thinking to myself, it'd be very interesting if it were in the African continent. But okay, so let's leave that aside. This is what I wanted to get at, though. And since I cut you off too, so come back with whatever you had. I just want to get this part out. A lot of people don't give Brexit the attention I think it deserves from the perspective it deserves. The general way that I hear the Brexit story told was that, it was something a little bit before Trump. They had no idea. The powers responsible for allowing that referendum to happen had no idea that it was going to turn out the way it did. Oh, it was just wacky and crazy. We didn't think that the public would ever possibly do well with it. And actually have it happen. And so you've got all these people, many people who are otherwise, pretty solid in terms of elite theory, who understand that, there's always an oligarchy in control wherever something is ostensibly called or is called supposedly a democracy. And they're like, oh, yeah, but this is one of these weird situations where just out of luck, the people spoke and their voice was heard.
the way I understand it is that it did catch the establishment a little bit flat-footed, but from what I gather, they looked at it and said, well, does this really derail our major global interests or not? Is there a recirculation of elites? No. Okay, well then policies don't have to change. I think it was sort
and
of
they did not do so.
Sorry?
Go on, sorry.
No, because I mean, look, I don't necessarily have the level of granular detail that you fellas in AA's circle have, but from my impression, I think that because I've watched some of the little Twitter debates, and they seem a little bit too polarized to reflect reality to me. So there's like, oh well, it was a genuine people's movement versus, oh, it was all rigged by the establishment. Like, kind of go, yeah, I mean, there's kind of a middle ground you can strike here, because as much as the elites do control institutions, they're not omnipotent, and so you do get things breaking through that they can't control. It's just
I tend to think that you have things breaking through that they can't control when there is a counter elite or a competing elite faction that wants to see them occur. And that's the main point I'm trying to get here. And as Woodland points out here, there are advantages for peeling the United Kingdom out of the European system to what it's only to a limited extent. They've attached new tendrils, but in potential, there is still a great amount of room for what the United Kingdom could do outside of the European Union if they chose to. That was not there before Brexit, at least in terms of the charters or whatever that had been signed, or the agreements that had been made. And so what's interesting to me is that when we see a move back towards, and trust me, everyone, and this should be clear to you, Robert, I'm coming back to South Africa. This is all to set the stage for South Africa, but you've got the return of a multipolar world. You've got the United States really now confronting the fact that it doesn't have massive land armies, that it really is a naval power, that it's the idea that we're going to be able, even with proxy countries backed by us, to throw our weight around relative to countries like China and Russia in the great heartland area. That idea is preposterous, right? So we have to take a look at what our historical role was to try to project power abroad. And obviously it's naval power. So you get Brexit, you get oddly right before Trump. And then you get the business of the United Kingdom investing in aircraft carriers again and trying to get their shit together in terms of being able to project naval power once again. And then you get talk about
it might be necessary now that the Argentinians are talking shit about the Falklands again.
Yes, it may well it may well be, but to me, what's interesting is that there's this is the whole idea that people like Lionel Curtis and Rhodes and that Carol Quigley book that you and I have talked about I recently discussed in the stream with AA. The United States and the United Kingdom are joined at the hip. The United States, who's dominant in that relationship, we can argue another time. But the fact is that the projection of the naval power, the model, the methods, the system is historically established. And we know that it has had key components. So when you had Rhodes come down and try to, that whole thing with the Jameson raid and the attempted coup there, Rhodes and then the Milner group, and then all of them talking about how, if necessary, the United States could become a commonwealth again, so to speak, in all but name, or that if necessary, the United Kingdom could get rolled up within that U.S. system. So you don't have to accept these things, but against this background, with the return of a multipolar world,
that's an interesting point you bring up. That's an interesting angle you bring up, because you're sort of hinting at the possibility of the British having gained the upper hand in that Anglo-American elite.
Oh yeah, there
is an argument to make over there that's not completely outlandish, but I still haven't got I haven't been able to get a copy of the big book on this topic, which is called the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. I can't remember the guy's name, but there's a specific book on this, and this is about a specific period of time when the Round Table Group got captured by the Fabian Society in about the 20s, 30s. And the thing is, it's called Chatham House now. And the guy who's got the biggest pull in the Chatham House is Tony Blair. And Tony Blair and Bill Clinton were both members of the Fabian Society, which opened its branches in America at the same time as it captured the Round Table Group.
And Bill Clinton was a big fan of Carroll Quigley's book, The Anglo-American Establishment.
He was taught by Quigley at university.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about all these tendrils, and I want to I want to return us back to the South Africa aspect, but forgive me, the reason I brought this up is because now we can see that from this perspective, just what you were touching on earlier. So I'm really just sort of I'm riffing on what you had brought up with the Chinese attempting to look at some of these global sea trade choke points. They're also very rapidly building their blue water navy, right? Now it appears that all the folks who said, "Oh, one world," they're now like, "Oh no, maybe there are geostrategic realities and they have to do with territories," right? So from that perspective, this business of peeling off the Cape Colony to return it to this system of Anglo-American alliance, which most importantly manifests as the Five Eyes. You saw Robert sometime back that I wrote on Twitter. The Cape colony could become, or the Cape could become, the sixth eye. Conceivably.
I think that's possible.
And controlling geostrategic choke points, and then getting interest from some of the British people who were involved with Brexit. That would all seem to fit together. So what are your thoughts on that bigger picture and its possibilities?
Look, I can see that, but the thing is, I'm close enough. I'm not inside the building, so to speak, but I'm close enough to the window so I can pick up some conversations. So the way I get it is actually they don't want that. So the party in charge of the province, they're extremely pro-American, right? And to give you an explanation, I think there's another article I could have sent you which details this, but they made a hell of a lot of advances. So the guy who's premier now, he's kind of alienated within the party at the moment because he's the only rival faction there is. So the party is dominated since its formation by a small circle of Anglos and Jews. So it's like what's it called? Freemasons, a very tight-knit circle of Jewish elites, and then old English liberal elites, and they form like a little cluster. And the first challenge to that party comes from a very boring, by all descriptions, very boring middle-class guy called Alan Windy. A terrible name because he's made fun of by people who don't like him by calling him Anal Wind, but he's by all accounts he's actually a really decent guy. He doesn't share my priorities on things, but I have some respect for him. He started out in the town of Knysna, and he put together. There's some dodgy details around here, but I think I'll leave that out for now because it gets too complicated. But he started using this Knysna tourist company, which is attached to the local municipality there, to build up his own little base of donations and investment. And he folded that up into a provincial level organization called Westgrow. And Westgrow has been very effective. They brokered specific regional trade deals with the United States for the province. So Alan Windy has built up his own patronage network, political patronage network, by himself, more or less. And he's been the only one really pushing from the beginning for devolution of control to the province. I caught him on this digital conference on renewable energy recently. And because no one else in the press was asking actual questions, I ended up asking all of them, almost all but one. And I posed a question to him like, why didn't you get started with this stuff sooner? And he leans back in his chair and he goes like this, well, like one of these, like you can start seeing like irritation breaking through. And he says that basically in his first week in office, he started trying to do this, and he got pushback from his colleagues who had no interest in it. Then they sent him legal opinion saying, "Oh, we can't really do anything." But he hinted that it wasn't really about that, but more that they trusted the ANC to turn the ship around. So
Yeah.
right. So he was letting his emotions out just a little bit, which is unusual because the guys in that party are fucking rocks in terms of like keeping their opinions to themselves. I mean, they're very strategic guys, and some of them are very, very capable political maneuverers. We've got, the guy who's in charge of safety and security in Cape Town is like a household name on the Cape Flats, because he's supposedly the big intelligence guy who knows where everybody is and where they're hiding, and like, so like
And
all the
hookers
gangs
and drug stashes. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's just an incredibly bloody effective guy, but he's stone faced. You have no idea what he's thinking, no matter how long you talk to him. He doesn't let a tiny peep of his true emotions come through any time.
But your main point is, if I understood you, you were stepping forward to say, well, maybe not some sort of Anglo-American alliance because
no. So what I was saying is, if we did get independent, we would become that, because the existing elite are heavily pro-Western, right? So they've taken stances like they publicly rebuke. They're starting to form their own bloody foreign policy. They're striking their own trade deals, their own aid deals, their own investment deals with the United States, right? At a provincial level.
Do it first and formalize it afterwards.
Exactly. So they're also they're pushing. They've been pushing recognition of America's positions on foreign policy as well. They've been courting all of these international bodies like the fucking Chatham Houses and what have you. And they've been going, and they did this big pro-Ukrainian thing where they showed the Ukrainian flag on the city hall, and they've taken Israel's side in the Gaza conflict, and it's just
I've seen memes about
they're
that.
Sucking up hard. They're sucking up hard, and the thing is that what they want from it is they want American backing to get control of the country next year in the elections. And they have enormous funds, despite only having like 25% of the vote. They have, if we're optimistic, they have the vast majority of all campaign donations. So, and it's not from local oligarchs like the Oppenheimers who've been running the shop since fucking 1920 odd. It's also like international NGOs that have been dumping money into their coffers to push for fucking. They want this sort of multi-party coalition to kick the ANC out, but that's not going to bloody happen. We're not quite the same as all of these other countries that you can just steer around with color revolutions. You
might have a situation where, I'm just saying, I speculate. I'm only speculating, and I'm doing so without your knowledge, background, and your expertise living there and studying it. But could we not be seeing a situation, first off, where we must first conceive of more than one faction in the Anglo-American alliance? So you could, for example, imagine a Trump-Farage-ish faction. That's the front of it within the Anglo-American power structure. And you could also imagine your typical Council on Foreign Relations, or neocons or Hillary Clinton or whatever, Obama type faction, Biden faction. That could be one issue that's going on. And I encourage people not to forget that. Sorry?
The Brezhnev faction.
Well, you also could see I also encourage people not to distinguish here between America versus a Commonwealth UK arrangement, because under this model, the Anglo-American system is dominant. And at this point, it seems ridiculous to try to think of one or the other as independent. But here's the main point that I wanted to get. You could be seeing I would speculate, a situation where the DA and all the investment in that says, why leave anything on the table? Let's take all of it. Let's push as our primary option to take the entire country in order to steer these parts away and to maintain control. Because yes, you have mineral wealth in the Cape Colony, but there's all that other vast territory that has lots of great stuff in it. Okay, the next thing, which is why people went after the damn Kimberley diamond fields in the first place.
The platinum group minerals and the coal and everything is really up in the Transvaal. So it's like,
which is why you could definitely say, yeah, they're like, fuck this bullshit of peeling off just the Cape, but they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. You could be looking at, here's our first choice, and failing our first choice, if we can't manage it, then let's go for the Cape Independence, peel it off, and it'll give us this lever and maintain our strategic choke point and give us the ability to run things in the region indirectly. Because if we can just get the ship righted and the stuff organized in this one area, then as it economically gains strength, it can begin to throw its weight around in these other territories, just as the British did from the Cape Colony to places like the Transvaal previously.
I get that angle, but the way I'm looking at it is, look, if they're not putting money into it now, it's not a real plan B, is it? So there's no backing internationally.
Well, wait a minute. Don't you believe that the Cape Independence has real prospects?
Well, I do, but this is not what I'm saying. But it's by no means certain. It's by no means certain. Like, I'm not going to give you rainbows and puppy dogs here. There's a chance that it could fail. There's a significant chance it could fail. If we get a referendum, we can succeed, but we have to get the referendum first, and that requires actually pushing the DA out of their majority position in the province in order to force them to hold a referendum, because they're refusing.
So let's go back to this whole thing with Brexit. I mean, doesn't it seem absolutely incomprehensible that they allowed a referendum to occur here? Again, I'm looking at it from the perspective of elite theory. If someone with real power says do it, it might just get done.
Yeah, but I think sometimes they get a bit cocky, or they figure, well, we couldn't block this without causing disturbances, or they've got their hands full with other things. And there's any number of reasons why, organizations ignore fucking $100 bills flying around. I mean, for example, I look at the way that the DA is structuring their national campaign right now. It's completely retarded. They're wasting tons of money and effort when they could make easy gains just by focusing on 3 provinces and focusing their post-election strategy around changing the municipal demarcations. And that would solidify their control over several metropolitan regions forever. Like, if they could do a little bit of boundary engineering, they would never have to worry about sitting in coalition governments that continually fall apart. And they're just not thinking this way. You've got to understand, there's also serious ideological blocks that people have. And in South Africa, the superstition around things that might even superficially resemble something apartheid, people just lose their minds. They can't think rationally or pragmatically about anything. So there's difficulties with this. So I kind of understand the mindset here. So I can smell when something weird is going on. I mean, it was very, very fishy when Cyril Ramaphosa, the current leader, for example, so he won because basically the Americans and the Europeans dumped millions of rands into his pocket, and he used it to buy out the branches in the ruling party. And there was a very violent struggle for control in KZN that took the lives of several hundred local level councillors, as well as a huge fight between the various taxi and trucking cartels that are attached to those factions, right? And then when he tried to seal the deal by having Jacob Zuma arrested, Zuma's followers burnt down half the country. So it's like, we have had these shenanigans happen before, but look how it turns out. Cyril Ramaphosa has pushed through almost entirely communist and anti-Western reforms. Like, everything he's just gone he's further left than Jacob Zuma, Jacob Zuma is a raw pragmatist who looks after his own people, and he's a mafia don. That's how he thinks. Cyril Ramaphosa is a dyed-in-the-wool communist who's, who knows how to talk business with people. That's, and so everyone's been blindsided. And you're watching even like the business moguls now. You telling me he's really going to nationalize all of healthcare in South Africa, all health insurance? Wow. Oh, wow. What the fuck? These people were like in the committees with these people. And now they're shitting their pants that they're going to basically lose billions and billions of rands because the government.
But wouldn't if this Chinese backed communist play for South Africa, and not just Chinese, because the Russians had enormous, like you said, ANC being run by the Comintern once upon a time, right? So if South Africa fully goes in that direction, would we not have to say that the Anglo-American powers would suffer greatly and lose primary access to these resources, as well as this strategic point at the Horn of Africa? Would they not?
Yeah, that's true. They absolutely could. But the trade balance isn't there. So America has been moving fast to increase trade with South Africa so that we can't do any fast moves without suffering massive economic shocks. And we're really...
And that would seem to fit with the DA angle of, no, we don't need any kind of independence. Let's just stick with it. We got a program. We're going to get the trade balance
Rainbow
more in the favor of the West.
Mandela 2.0. And see black people, white people can really get along. Everything's just fine and rosy.
But the thing is that if they go in that direction, it's the other guy gets a vote. It's like, it's not much as fun to hunt when the rabbit's got a gun. In this situation, yes, the West can try to do all these things, but China has shitloads of money to throw around. And now Russia has shitloads of money operating together with China to pull levers in this region.
You got to remember, recently, one of the big scandals that they paid attention to is there was a Russian military ship that came through, and whispers down the grapevine are that from people who've talked to, beg your pardon, actual intelligence agents from the United States down here, say that essentially there's an organized crime outfit with Nigerian contacts that is tied into the Jacob Zuma faction over here that put a whole bunch of that got weapons on board that ship, and that those weapons ended up in Gaza. So this is all rumors that I cannot confirm, but yeah, there are a lot of odds and ends moving around here. And the thing is, South Africa, because it has such a large, informal and corrupt sort of set of networks surrounding the government and the ruling party, it's very hard to know what's really going on. I mean, even people who are really who I look up to as being sharp and in the know, there's stuff that they just don't see, they can't understand. No one really knows what's potting. And there's a lot of opaque things that happen here because, again, this is Africa, and Africa, everything's informal, everything's off the books, and what's happening in the liberal white world is, well, it's confused. I mean, you can see the things that are happening, but they seldom make sense for any particular person's interest. I mean, you get a lot of silly maneuvers that a lot of people will make because they have ideological blinkers on, and I think, one of the sillier, but if you want some interesting stuff, there's a move that the DA made recently where they're trying to parachute in. Now, they've done similar things before, but because they know that black people don't vote for minorities. Black people are very hostile to racial minorities in the political world, in the political sphere. And so they've tried to parachute in leaders before. They did it once with this lady called Mampele Rampele, a very silly name. And her claim to fame is that she was once Steve Biko's girlfriend, and and she's also a very wealthy businessman. Well, on a local level, she's wealthy. It's not international wealthy, just local wealthy. So she started a little political party, and then the DA said, come and join us, and you'll be our presidential candidate, and we can all be Rainbow Nation. That didn't work out. They did it with this narcissistic pastor called Musi Maimane, who now runs a little outfit called Build One South Africa, where he's trying to get all the independent candidates together. And this is the way that we will transform South African society. But he doesn't really do much work there, from what I'm told. So, that one failed. They didn't get any black votes, and he became seen as a puppet of the white man very quickly. So now they're trying to do it with an Indian South African businessman called Roger Jardine, who, I mean, he was a civil service appointment for under the ANC's first cabinet in '94, the age of 29. And then he went off to work for some companies like Prime Media and then First Rand and all this kind of stuff. So, banking world. And basically all the new business owners of the DA, the rumor is, basically said, we want you to put one of our guys in charge, but we need someone browner than you because John Steenhuisen doesn't really, he doesn't look like presidential candidate material and so on. And the thing is that because the DA is so small, they've got to work with all of these little partners. It's 7 parties that are forming this cluster that they're going to try and put against the ANC. And all the other coalition partners, got very uppity, and rightly so, because they're told that they're going to have the presidential candidate for the coalition is going to be this guy. And they say, excuse me, we're still independent political parties. We still have a say here. And you're not just going to parachute some muhu in from nowhere. So, again, the DA is doing silly shit. They keep slapping their coalition partners. They treat them with incredible disrespect. They've, on several occasions, they've deliberately collapsed metropolitan governments because they couldn't get their way. And I was speaking to one of the guys from one of the smaller parties who was in a talk, and apparently, someone brings up very sensitive, but if you collapse this talk, then the ANC and the EFF get the city back. And then Helen Zille, who's the big person, and she's the most powerful person in the party still, I think. Arguably, I mean, it's not 100%, but I'll say it for the sake of argument her. But she said basically, well, then so be it. It's our way or the highway. And they've gotten shtick for that because they've allowed so many coalitions to collapse. And then they wonder why they don't get re-elected. Because if you can't govern the city when you get into power, people go, oh yeah, voting for these guys is chaos. We're going back to the ANC. And that's what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay. They got voted in. They ran a coalition with a wafer-thin majority. And they couldn't keep control of anything because the ANC, so they didn't want to fire any of the ANC civil services because we're above this. We don't do cadre deployment like the ANC does. We're principled,
Yeah, to me, this sounds at least plausible that what we're seeing here. I mean, this would be my guess. Again, this is from the outside. I know shit about this, but just given what I know about human nature, it would be very easily for me to imagine, the thing that we don't understand about why these people seem to do so many contradictory things that seem to, lead to them stepping on their own dicks, is simply because there's a bunch of behind the scenes bribes.
Well, the thing is, I don't even look at it that way. You've got to also understand institutional culture. So in the DA is a very tightly run ship.
Yeah, so behind the scenes bribes are part of the institutional culture.
Sure. No, sure. Look, I mean, for example, they got into hot water in 2016 briefly because it turned out that the Freemasons were picking the party lists in the metros that they got up in the north. and non-Freemasons went to the papers to whine about it. So yeah, so it's one of those things where they're used to having the leaders of the party are used to having things their way inside the party, and people who pull in different directions are not really tolerated, and they can be ignored because Helen Zille and Tony Leon hold most of the purse strings, and Alan Winde is being sidelined because he's the only sort of funding alternative, and if he differs on something, he can actually have a say, and they don't like that. And so when they get into coalition with other parties, they go, well, why are we letting these pipsqueaks have a say? They're just along for the ride. We're the real big dog over here. And so they play hardball because they feel entitled. So I think I think the thing is that it's much more easily explained by how people are used to doing business in their own sphere than it is by appealing to outside forces, because you'd have to pinpoint the exact outside forces and what they actually want and how they strategically benefit from all these cock-ups, because you know what I mean? So because I don't see those angles. For me, it's much more easily explained by saying, okay, well, these people have these ideas, these ideological taboos, and these administrative habits, and that can explain enough for me to. Do you know what I mean?
Right. It's a more parsimonious explanation. Yes, I understand. Yeah. But we do have a situation we have seen in the Anglo-American world. The various constituent elements of the empire, whether or not that be the United Kingdom or the United States. Certainly, we've seen this, where the where the legal system and the highest courts are subverted, permitting those highest courts to do something that they were not constituted to do, which is to legislate from the bench. This is very famous.
Well, deliberately meant to legislate.
Yes, and I'm about to get to that. Believe me. So in the United States, we see that the takeover of the U.S., the reframing of it, what Christopher Caldwell would have referred to or did refer to in his recent book, fairly being sort of a new United States with a new social contract that came in around 64, 65. And in large part, all of these Supreme Court decisions were what made it happen. And it didn't fucking matter at all what any elected legislator who's supposedly, their mandate is establishing the law. It didn't fucking matter what they think. It doesn't matter what their institutional practices are. It doesn't matter what their habits are. And then what did we see in Britain under Blair, but the creation of a similar sort of lever at the top of the system, which is not traditionally a part of their arrangement there in Britain. Blair, if I understand this correctly, I'm not a Brit, but I think I followed it properly. Blair came in and constituted a highest court that acts as this top instrument of control for everything. And now, from what you just told me,
constitutional court in a country without a codified constitution is an interesting phenomenon.
Yes, rather interesting. And then we've got this situation where in South Africa, you yourself just said that this is baked in to the arrangement with the courts there. And you know what's very interesting? I'm going to bring two things up here. First one is the only area, or the most of, I shouldn't say the only, because they're doing an enormous amount with community organization, but a major area of AfriForum success that I have seen has been lawfare. And it seems that you can still get a reason. Pardon?
Up to a point.
Yes,
look, I'm letting slip. I've got a personal sort of position of I'm not going to give them. I'm not going to criticize them at the moment because I have some criticisms of them, but I'm keeping them sort of to myself until because I think they're extremely vital and their shortcomings are. They're not a threat at the moment to things, going forward the way I'd like to. But I'm starting to get increasingly worried about their effectiveness. It's how should I put it? They're good people. They're good people. And Analyst and Sale, I think it's fantastic that he's advancing an organization as he is, because if he gets ahead, he is likely to be a very effective leader, and he's very good at playing politics and stuff like that. So he's very diligent and very principled, which is rare. So I think a lot depends on who gets selected for what leadership position in the next couple of years. So I'll,
but this is
yeah.
I didn't mean to go into my main point is that they've only had success up to a point, but they're certainly knowledgeable about the internal political landscape of South Africa. Yeah. And they have chosen, based on that understanding of the internal political landscape, to focus a major part of their effort upon lawfare, the legal system, and trying to take things to the courts. Now, but that's not the only point, and I don't want to make it all about Afroforum because I don't know much about them. I just, I like Conscious Caracol. And so that I think is anyway, but my point is here, let's bring in the second one so that we don't get derailed into a discussion of Afroforum. What does IEC stand for?
Independent Electoral Commission.
Okay, so is that how does the Independent Electoral Commission relate to the highest courts, if at all?
Well, it doesn't. It's like it's a civil service body that handles the logistics around the elections. That's it.
And you just wrote recently in one of your in one of these Substack pieces that we referred to, you were talking about how decisions made by the IEC basically slapped the shit out of the ANC. Like really with their electoral prospects.
There's been some interesting things there, but there's not a lot of public information on it, and I don't know who to contact to understand the details. But there has been increasing involvement from some of the shadier and more malicious elements of the international NGO community for trying to prop up the IEC, and so you've had like the Gates and I don't know if it was Google or someone, but they basically said that in the coming election, they're going to help fight disinformation and stuff like that. So the thing is, the campaign season hasn't really got started because we just had a court ruling today that will allow them to actually set the electoral date. Because there was a dispute about how votes are allocated for independent candidates now that that's been put on the ballot. So that held up proceedings for a while. But I think once campaign season starts, we're going to see some funny stuff happen. Well, and then we'll be able to really say what the arrangements are.
Right, but and to what end, and who would benefit most from it. Okay, well, my thing was that I had assumed that there must be some relationship between the Electoral Commission and the highest courts. Apparently not
organizationally, but naturally they affect each other. It's like the IEC, the Parliament could write something that's found unconstitutional, as has happened now. They found that the barrier to registering an independent candidate was too high. There was some dispute over how they allocated seats, but the government won that argument.
My main point I was trying to bring up, the stuff with Afroforum going after the legal aspect, the idea, more importantly, of constituting courts to act as an oligarchical lever of control from the top that could effectively just step entirely around the legislature to make shit happen that you want to happen. The IEC doesn't fit that exactly, but it does seem like a similar institution that one could focus one's attention on in order to change the situation on the ground in ways that really mattered in terms of maintaining power or seizing it. And now so the IEC here does not fit the model that I brought up, which I still think bears thinking about, of doing this with the courts, and which is baked into the system, as you pointed out, in South Africa.
Well, I mean, but now there was the outgoing Chief Justice, Mogoeng. I don't know why these people name themselves twice, but anyway. He's a big African nationalist, very conservative, fundamentalist Christian, the whole, interesting combo of things. But he he said that there's someone who's not going to disclose who, but a big international billionaire with a big NGO base under him, offered him, I think the bribe was 600 million. Or was it 600,000 US dollars? I think that's what it was. And he said he didn't take it, and he says that we should all keep our eye out for certain things like that.
And now you're talking about possibly the Gates Foundation or some similar NGO getting involved with the Electoral Commission.
Correct. So, I mean, the thing is, the IEC is
in a way that hammered the shit out of the ANC. From your very point, I mean, basically the impositions there in terms of what they would accept in terms of voter registration and having to do it both in a district and then in a sub-district.
That was actually the ANC. The ANC has done this as well, because what they're shifting to a more district-based model for a very clear reason. So the new electoral commission as now the parliament will be chosen off 200 regionally elected seats and 200 PR seats. And there's like this formula they use to calculate how you make up the remainder and so on. But what it looks like to me is if you have a constituency based system, then the largest parties win more, right? So the ANC could, even if they lose the popular majority, could end up winning, staying in charge of parliament. So, I mean, this is a thing that the Afrikaner Nationalist Party did when they first got into office. Is they gerrymandered the seats so that the Senate was stacked with Nats. So it's that kind of thing. I think the ANC are belatedly cottoning onto, and it's gonna privilege the two largest parties, which are the ANC and the DA, and it's gonna hurt.
So it's kind of like a first past the post thing in Britain.
Yeah, because it's much easier to gerrymander than it is to rig an election, because rigging elections require a hell of a lot of organization. They require loyalty and cohesion within the ruling party and the civil service, and the ANC doesn't have that. They have a lot of they're not ZANU-PF.
And Africa in itself, I mean, just the simple fact that you have so many openings for minor and regional corruption to come in and affect things, that it would be very difficult to like make all of your crooks dance to the same tune, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was easier 10, 15 years ago when they had but they didn't need to do it then, because they had it like, super majority. So now that they're slipping below 50%, it's like, oh, it's time to get your thinking hats on. But now the party's weak and financially moribund, and there's problem. I mean, shit, we had news today that because of a lawsuit that they lost against a PR company they hired back in 2019, they owed 100 million rand to this guy now because court costs piled up and all kinds of stuff. And the sheriff's office basically attached the headquarters of the ANC and said, well, okay, well, you guys are not going to pay. Just hand over your headquarters. They showed up this morning at Lutuli House, which is and the ANC members refused the sheriff entry. So we're going to see how that plays out in the next few days. But it looks like they're in trouble on a number of fronts. And then, of course, you've got the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa has no ethnic base within his party. So, no ANC leader has ever managed 2 terms as head of the party. You always get them pushed out in the second. And that's happened to that happened to Thabo Mbeki, that happened to Jacob Zuma, and Cyril Ramaphosa's got a decent challenger in the form of Paul Mashatile, who's capable of speaking both to the business world and the unions and the Communist Party and all of these different factions. So, and he's not from like a tiny weeny minority like Ramaphosa is. I mean, the Venda are, the best way to think about them is they're like, the Jews of black people. They're considered to be these shrewd, business savvy kind of guys. That's the stereotype anyway. And so he has to play middleman to a lot of people, and he's facing a major corruption scandal because he was stuffing money into his mattress and his furniture and his house help breaks into his house at night time, steals the money out of the furniture, and runs away. But he doesn't want this to get into he doesn't want them arrested by the police, because then it'll go into the national record that he's got untaxed, unregulated finance stuffed into his fucking furniture. So he contacts the president of Namibia, and they have these burglars basically extradited from a police station as they were before they got charged. And then this ends up in a national scandal because he bungles it and doesn't manage to cover his tracks properly. And mainly because a Zuma loyalist in the National Intelligence Organization called the SSA ratted on him to the public. So you've now got the situation where the president now has this huge major corruption scandal hanging over his head while he's trying to run a rather toothless and superficial anti-corruption campaign. It's not looking good. So, I mean, he's overseeing the collapse of like several major sectors of the economy. Most businesses are leaving. We've got ArcelorMittal pulled out. Volkswagen are going to pull out. There's a number of other companies, and then we're having, you know, hundreds of like normal South African business closures every year. And yeah, we're seeing Ramaphosa sitting over. He's right over the coals. So what we could even see is he gets elected, and then the party votes him out of power the next time there's an election challenge, an internal leadership challenge, and everything goes tits up. You have the president removed. You know.
Okay, so let me make sure.
Previously.
Let me make sure I understand this right. Then I'm trying to abstract a general picture here.
Yeah.
And it seems to me, on the one hand, the ANC is having real problems, and the DA believes that it can mount a real challenge and make a play. Sorry.
I just said silly buggers because they don't know how to play at that level. They really don't.
So, but that is the general picture in terms of South Africa as a whole nut, right? The ANC is having problems, but it's going to do everything it can to stay in power, and it's probably safe to assume that they have some degree of Chinese and or Russian backing. And then you have the DA that wants to make a liberal play for the entire country. The prospects aren't good, right? And then, and then against this background, there's this push. The whole focus of this stream to not do it that way. Instead, let's just peel a part off. And from some perspective, you could probably reasonably assert that it would be logical to imagine that your best chances of doing anything with this more or less failed Rainbow Nation would be to grab the best, most functional part of it and stand it up.
There's a lot of
and make it work.
So now this, I actually think that Cape Independence is not just like, oh, it's a good idea. I think it's fucking vital to our survival long term, because Ramaphosa has pushed through an acceleration of, you know, programs that fit what's called the National Democratic Revolution. So that's sort of, you know, race communism, but for real, not just, you know, this Fabian managerialism. So he's found a clever way of nationalizing the healthcare system. It really is a unique piece of policy, but I'd go into that another time. Someone else can fucking research this. There's lots of stuff written about it. But he's also pushing something called the district development model that will give the national government direct control over everything down to local municipalities. So it's sort of a new way of doing what the Soviets and Chinese did, which is where you have these parallel government structures that are controlled by the ruling party that monitor everything down to the ground floor for ideological and development tracking. So he's also got, I mean, that gets very little attention in the press, but it's one of the most pernicious things that he's got going. Then you've got the expropriation bill, which has passed both houses of parliament and is sitting on the president's desk awaiting a signature. He just has to sign off on it and said, okay, we're going to take all the white boys' land and money right now. And it's, there are a lot of loaded guns sitting on the desk for the
one quick question about that thing that's passed the parliament and is sitting on his desk awaiting his signature. How long conceivably within the constitutional framework could he sit on that? Could he sit on it for a year and a half and then sign it?
Yeah, he could sit on it absolutely indefinitely.
So he could basically wait. He could wait until after the elections and then just pull the trigger on it.
Correct. And so there are a lot of dangerous factors over here. And the thing is, if you can't get the Cape independent, all the capital and all the property of all the white people in the country is up for grabs by the state. And there are increasing capital controls that are being placed on the country that make it difficult to do forex exchange and all kinds of stuff. And that's only going to accelerate because of the recent currency manipulation scandal. So there was a big thing where Standard Chartered Bank colluded with BNP Paribas and a whole bunch of other people to manipulate the rand. And while that didn't make the most massive impact on the value of the rand, because the biggest driving factors were the shit governance over here, and then the Federal Reserve printing all the dollars or not printing all the dollars as the seasons determine. It's still enough for the government, for the ruling party, to use this to justify increasing capital controls. So it's going to be a very, very tight window. So if the Cape can't get independent, there's no way to protect that capital. And if you can't protect that capital, you have no funding base from which to protect the communities in the interior who are going to need saving. And right now is a crucial period for reform within the Afrikaner parallel governance sphere, because the federal plans for the Solidarity Movement, which encompasses AfriForum and several other organizations, is busy going through the pipeline. It's already initiated the process, and they'll be finished in October next year. And at the moment, I'm trying to lobby for input here. So I'll see if I make any impact. But it sounds like they're kind of sort of maybe listening a little bit. But basically, my thing is, you have to get the district boundaries redrawn so that Pretoria can be self-governing again. Well, not again, but can be self-governing for the first time. And it'll be a majority white Afrikaans city. But that's a difficult process because you're going to have to make the test guinea pig for that a non-white community so that you can establish a legal precedent that they can't deny. Constitutionally, it's complicated, but can be done. Then, Cape independence saves the majority of the minorities in this part of the country, and then protects the capital base. And you can use that to funnel investment into what's called the Anchor Town Plan. And the Anchor Town Plan is basically doing warp speed Orania projects all across the west of the country and in some parts from Mpumalanga. So, and there are a number of good options for that around the country, but it depends largely on whether you can mobilize the capital and get the coordination in the civic sphere, which has to be made much leaner and more efficient in order to be able to do this. But it's possible. All the instruments are sitting on the table right now. It's just a matter of actually operating with efficiency. And if that federal plan by Solidarity can come into motion, and they can make a decent decision to start saying things in favor of Cape independence, because they don't want to split the community and say things that might, because people are worried if the Western Cape goes, then there's no possibility of DA representing them in the parliament properly, and they're scared of a lot of things like this. So it is divisive. It's not so divisive down here in the Cape, but in the interior, it can be a divisive topic, even amongst conservatives. So if they can try and put a bit of a finger on the scale and move in towards saying, yes, we're behind Cape independence, we think this should happen, this is behind our values for self-determination and all that would help. but the politics are complicated because these are not democratic organizations. Not a lot of people sort of understand what's going on, and even on the inside, it can be very blurry. So we have a lot of pans in the fire at the moment, and
what is the and hotter. What is the time frame for all of this? What is the time frame for whether or not?
In my mind, we have, and it depends entirely on how well the economy performs and how rapidly the energy transition happens. But you know how those things go. Basically, I figure we've got between 5 and 10 years before the economy goes completely tits up permanently. And in the meantime, you've got to worry about the potential for an EFF-ANC coalition, which will accelerate the process dramatically.
And when are the next elections in South Africa?
Well, they're constitutionally mandated to happen at the latest in August. So they haven't picked a date yet. We'll find out in the next week or two, probably. But
within the next year.
Yeah.
Within the next year, there are going to have to be elections. A lot of this will be brought to a head. And then in terms of major milestones with whether or not it appears that Cape Independence is moving forward, what's the time frame for that? What's on the horizon now in terms of Cape Independence?
Well, I mean, look, let's say ideal timeline scenario. Ideal timeline scenario is we win, I don't know, 5 to 10% of the votes in the pro-independence parties put together. Knock the DA out of their majority position, force them into a coalition. You get a nice, smooth governance by trusted parties, because the Farage from Plus have a reputation for being very sort of straight dealing and very responsible, if slow moving on some things. And the referendum party will back them as long as they do the referendum. So you get a referendum date picked, hopefully during Christmas in 2024 or something, or maybe 2025. But you get the referendum done, and then once that's done, you basically just press the button and say, okay, we're independent now, bye-bye. But that's the difficult part, because you have to, this could happen rapidly. We could become an independent country in the next 2 to 3 years. And the problem with that is getting the DA to be bold enough to make big moves, because they're not bold. They're not bold people. They color in the lines very carefully. So
yeah, didn't you mentioned that example of Spain in your Substack piece, where the Catalan independence referendum happened, and then the people in charge said, "Oh, I guess we should now go ask." Right?
Yeah, and I mean, like, the thing is, I'm actually in contact with the guys at with a guy at the Catalonia Global Institute. So they've got a very fractured independence movement, where they've got 3 tiny little parties, some more left wing, some more right wing, who are for Catalan independence. And they're caught between a rock and a hard place, because they have some people who are fairly sort of right wing and nationalist, but they're forced to cooperate with the socialists in order to have any influence over government and achieve the autonomy they want. And the Spanish are in a crazy pickle. So, but yeah, so I speak to them a bit to just sort of hear a different perspective on this kind of process. And funnily enough, there's a very odd guy who has been on the fringes of the Cape Independence movement, he's a missionary who worked in South Sudan, and actually was partially responsible for initiating the independence bid in that part of the world. So, but his ideas are so far out of the mainstream. What's his name? Is Peter? Sure, but I can see his face. He's a sort of old Rhodesian type who fought in the South African military.
Stylish shorts. Those Rhodesian shorts, man.
Yeah, no, but absolutely fearless guy. I mean, just, the second he's done with his military, he becomes a missionary. He's just been all over deepest, darkest Africa, selling, spreading the word of God in some of the most. Peter Hammond, thank you, Dagbreker. Peter Hammond. If you look him up, if you want an interesting character, and he's fantastically polite. Although when I met him, I made the worst possible impression because I swear compulsively, and he does not stand for swearing.
Yeah, I have that flaw.
Yeah,
too.
He's an incredibly impressive man as an individual. But his, if you look at his website online, you'll see why he can't be part of the mainstream. There are a number of reasons. But yeah,
well, I have a question here that I want to make sure we answer. We got about just a little less than 20 minutes left. I want to try to get this in under 2 hours so that I don't have to manually upload to the other platforms. Just my own issue. Who do you think? Who can you identify in terms of any powers abroad, any interest outside of South Africa? Can you identify any group or organization that does seem to clearly back the Cape Independence movement from outside of South Africa?
See, now that's where it gets murky. I think Donald Trump would back it if he was in charge, but that's a big if. There are factions in the Republican Party which are, normal neocontypes who have made moves attacking South Africa recently. HR 145, you can look that up. There's a congressional motion. But when you look at Europe, it gets difficult. So the Dutch nationalists might be friendly to us. The Catalonians are split because most of them are left-wing, so they won't like us. So inside the movement, the guy I have contact with, he's like, he was getting shtick from his colleagues because he was talking to the Cape Independence guys. These evil right-wing fascist Nazi people. And so there's a conflict over there between, who supports what, because the Spanish aren't going to support any secession movement because they're already combating their own. So they don't want to establish a precedent internationally. But the UK,
presumably the Chinese and Russia would be against it.
Absolutely,
presumably. Okay, but now these are
because you have Nigel Farage, who is being potentially groomed to replace Rishi Sunak, and his buddies like Aaron Banks seem fairly confident that he's going to make that comeback. And so that would be a big feather in our, that would be a big boon to us. But even if he doesn't, so there's a guy in the independence movement, a young fellow called Robert King, who is, he's 19, 20, but he's a natural bloody talent, natural talent at politics. And he's got great connections in the UK as well, not only with like the Turning Point crowd, but even with Labour guys. And he says that within the Labour Party, since the big purge of the far left there, the people who are left are actually quite hostile to the ANC. And they're not completely, they sort of think the idea of Cape Independence is not terrible. So we don't know how that's going to go, but the sort of, like that little biopsy seems to have positive results, sort of vaguely positive results. So there's a likelihood that either way the election goes in Great Britain, there's still a chance that if we pull off independence, they'll recognize us. But it all really ultimately hinges on the United States.
So let me ask this then, if I may, just before moving on to the next question. Are you aware of any organizations outside of South Africa that are currently supporting the Cape Independence movement?
No.
Not who
not
might in
one,
the future.
not a single one. It's like, if you've been inside the movement, it's all of the funding comes from local guys. There's been like been a couple of diplomatic gestures from Nigel Farage and his circle of friends, but it's not money. And at the moment, it's just a lot of local middle class guys who are trying to trying to move the needle.
So it's not money from local guys who, for example, have considerable wealth, and
There are a
with
couple.
that
No,
wealth,
there
they have,
are a couple who have wealth who are putting some money into
but
it. They're
wealth
not,
with, they're not
but they're not
connected
oligarchs.
abroad.
They're not oligarchs. They're people who are rand millionaires, but are not, like big hitters internationally at all, or even at a national level. So we really are sort of outsider rebels quite completely, and it's going to be a difficult one, because new parties over here tend not to get much more than 1 or 2% of the vote in their first election, but we're going to have to take a significant slice. So we've got a steep challenge in front of us.
Okay, and then here's what I think is sort of a two-part closing question. We've got, I don't know, a little better than 10 minutes if I want to leave time for you to shill at the end and all the rest. But here's sort of a double question. If Cape independence were to happen, what would happen to the rest of South Africa? What would that world look like? What would happen if the Cape was peeled away? What would ensue if you flip that domino over? What would happen to the rest of it?
There'd be some civil unrest. There'd be some civil unrest. Probably a lot of it in South Africa proper. Probably a bit of it in the Cape, but even with our limited police powers, we've demonstrated the capacity to put down most violent protests. And the minute you get independence, you get enormous flexibility to reshape local security. And the amount of private security that we have and the competence of those people is extraordinary. Like, we could, if we deputize most of the private security in the province, we could immediately just remove all the police stations and military bases within a week. I'm that confident. If you've seen how incompetent, how terribly run. You watch the committee meetings on our military. They're on YouTube. You can watch this stuff, and you'll see actual members of the department saying, "We don't know what's going on inside our own organization. We have to learn from Defence Web, which is a defense contracting news organization for the African continent. They have to learn what's going on in their own departments from the freaking newspapers." That's how bad it is. They were sent to the thing is completely screwed. They can't maintain even basic presence for more than 2 weeks in one spot because they don't know how to do the logistics to get water and food to their own troops. That's the level we're on, and we're overstretched in peacekeeping missions up in Central Africa still. So,
the Cape is in a situation, it seems, where were it to happen, they have the necessary parallel institutions to make it stick, right? Through that period of transition. But here's the question: with that chunk broken off, what happens to the rest of South Africa? What's its future?
The rand will tank significant. The rand may tank significantly, but it depends also on how much capital can get transferred to the Western Cape quickly enough. We have our own stock exchange that started a couple of years ago. So if a lot of South African countries decide to stick their money in the Cape Stock Exchange, then that will mitigate the fall of the rand, because we're going to be using the rand for a while after independence, quite likely. And so the rand could go up, it could go down. It depends entirely on how quickly everyone reacts to the situation, but it'll be chaos for a bit. I think that how quickly we manage to take care of border security and deal with land invasions will have big impacts for the long-term stability of the country.
The country here, meaning the Cape, or the rest of South Africa?
The Cape.
Right.
As for the rest of South Africa, I think you'll see immediately and very quickly a huge number of minorities leaving South Africa to come to the Cape, which will mean property prices will go through the flipping roof, as if they aren't already. Whether or not we can control black immigration depends on whether we have the balls to set the policies required and whether or not we're willing to cut welfare. And I think that combination alone would rapidly shift the demographic balance back to the way it used to be. But yeah, I think what you'd also get quite likely is you'd see a move. You'd see the Northern Cape looking at seceding. Sorry.
And what about to turn again to the rest of South Africa? What do you think might happen in terms of the Zulu majority KwaZulu-Natal?
I think they'd start taking it seriously, but you've got to remember the Zulu King is the real voice in the Zulu nationalist arena. The IFP is composed mostly of Zulu aristocrats who are very close to the royal family, but the King is facing he's American educated and he's not all that emotionally invested in his own traditional authority. And so there's a difficulty over there. It's the same problem as over here, where you've got like the top elites don't really all that much want to be their own thing. They're kind of happy, but it might sort of come to bite him because the ruling party wants to liquidate his realm, which is sitting in a legal entity called the Ingonyama Trust. But the IFP might actually gain control of KwaZulu-Natal in the coming election. They've been growing enormously. And the DA has grown a little bit as well because they've got this a gay Zulu-speaking mayor in a place called Ngeni, who's like, he's being promoted all over the world by flipping Time magazine and shit. It's bizarre. But the DA could probably end up being the junior partner in a conservative coalition in Zululand, which would change things considerably. I don't think that they're going to go. I don't think Zulu independence is going to happen anytime soon unless something major shifts. But there are a lot of people in Zululand who like the idea. There's just the problem is that there's no organization for it. So,
okay, well, yeah. Here's another angle for you then in our final 5 minutes here. What, if any, nuclear option lever is there that the ANC and whoever it is that backs them, what sort of nuclear option lever could these factions pull to torpedo this entire thing, to be sure that they maintain control and that Cape independence never happens?
There's nothing obvious. If they lose their tempers and decide to start assassinating people, then things go haywire very quickly. Because there's been an unspoken rule that assassinations don't cross party boundaries. So the ANC will kill each other, and occasionally ANC and IFP will kill each other. But nobody comes after white councillors. No one comes after DA councillors. We keep that called, because DA is not really a threat. So they don't really go there because it's not worth the horrendous risk that would come in the international community. And the ANC are petrified of the international community, because they know historically that international sanctions are what broke the National Party and allowed them to get into power. So that balance of forces calculation is something they pay very close attention to. And they test the waters every now and again. They pulled back. Notice that when they took their stance on Russia, they officially said neutral and then in private celebrated and everything. They backpedaled and invited the Ukrainians to tour the country after they got the Americans breathing down their neck. So, and I think the reason that they're going with Gaza now is they can sense that there's a shift in there's a shift now, because they haven't gone so hard against Israel ever before. They kicked the Israeli ambassadors out there, withdrawing their own diplomatic corps in Israel. It's on that level. It's got the South African Jewish Board of Deputies to go as far as actually condemning them and the EFF, which they've never condemned the EFF for any of their genocidal rhetoric before, but now that they're backing Hamas, they're like, oh, well, this is a hateful man. So, I don't know. The ANC have they have a good eye on balance of forces, and I don't think they're going to do anything rash. And I think they're going, if independence does come down, they won't know what to do because they don't have any easy, obvious moves. And it'll depend entirely on the international situation. And as far as I can tell, if the international community gives us the rubber stamp, there's nothing the ANC can really do. They'll try and destabilize the Cape, and they'll get some mileage there, but it won't stop independence. It'll just make it unpleasant for a couple of months. And then everything will go back to normal. We'll be in charge of our security. Crime will start going down again. No more racial discrimination. So we can run our own businesses again. We can get promoted in the public sector again. We can go to university on merit again. I mean, just fuck.
A consummation devoutly to be wished.
Yeah, it has to happen. It really has to happen. And I don't know. Sorry, maybe sorry, I'm getting all sentimental again. But I can't see the ANC pulling any real massive tricks. There's no obvious maneuvers they can pull. They might, if they get really insane, they'll try something like charging DA and a referendum party members with treason and stuff, but that won't stick because the Constitution won't allow it.
Okay, so it sounds as though it's something that really could happen. It's not going to be any kind of easy road to hoe, but it really might happen, and it is something that could conceivably happen in the next few years. Well, we've got literally like a minute left, so. I want to thank you very much for coming on to talk about this. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention I started a newspaper called the Cape Independent. Hopefully it'll be big enough to have some influence on the local elections next year, so we'll see how that goes.
You can, and in which case you will become the only based journalist. You will become the only journalist that we don't all have to spit at when you walk by, which would be a good thing. You can redeem a profession that in many respects seems unredeemable. Well, listen, I put the links down below. I'm going to add that one in for the Substack, but can you go ahead and shill? Do you have anything coming up that people need to know about?
No, nothing public. The report on the land invasions will happen. That's a big, nice, long study. There's some interesting little vignettes in it. It'll come up in a month or two. So
okay, so the main way people can get you is with your Twitter link, your YouTube link, and the Substack one that I will shortly be adding below. Well then, yeah, as always, thank you very, very much, sir. It's the usual thing with South Africa where I think I know something about it, and then I talk to someone there and I'm like, this is impossible to get my fucking head around. But it's certainly this is a good step towards it. And so yeah, hopefully we can come back around and talk about this in future. I'll go ahead and end now and thank everyone for watching. And be sure to stay tuned. I'll have more content coming up soon. So thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all, certainly, Mr. Daigen.